Testing, testing. Hello, everyone. We're going to start in just a minute here. A few more folks still dialing in. Before we get started, can a couple people confirm either in the questions or the chat that they can hear me okay, that they can see my screen okay? Don't see any responses yet. Okay, thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Okay, so we'll just give, we're still waiting on a handful of people. I'll give them one more minute, then we'll get started. And thanks for everyone who replied. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Still some folks connecting here, but we are recording. So that's the first thing I'll mention. We are recording this session and it will get posted out to our Cyrus and Vimeo page shortly after today's session ends. So if you did miss any of this, or there's some part you want to go back to, feel free to do so. I'll also mention today's session, we are going to be looking at code a little bit towards the second part of it. The code that I'm demoing here, I will post up to the Syracen community, hopefully later today, if anyone wants to take that code for a test themselves. Okay, without further ado, I am going to get started. So welcome everyone to part 3 of the Syracen Asset Management with Microsoft Service Manager webinar series. This is part 3 of 4. If you are just joining us for the first time here today, we have part 1 and part 2 on our Vimeo page. Part 4 is scheduled for next month, and that'll wrap up the series. I am hosting today's session for North America. I am Nick Bellick, the Services Manager here at Syracen. And next slide, there we go. All right, so quick review. The first couple sessions, this is what was covered to recap. So the first session, Mike and Billy walked through intro to hardware asset management. So they talked through what's new, what's the kind of new in the product now, new in the future roadmap upcoming, how to install, how to update, went through all the classes and so forth, and went through importing initial data. And then if you joined myself in North America or Jeff in the UK for session 2, we went through and started talking through some asset management procedures, which we'll do a quick recap of that here in a moment as well. Now, so this is session 3, so identifying and overcoming roadblocks. So the focus of this session is really to prioritize and prioritize weaknesses, find those weaknesses, figure out how much of a weakness is it actually compared to maybe some other issues, and what you can do to remediate. And there's kind of 3 tiers of that, which we'll get into. So we'll go into, like I said, some examples of those remediation steps, some process-driven, some process and training driven, and some kind of simple admin level changes that you can make, and then some more in-depth customization changes you can make that might help make the all-around experience a little bit more successful for you. And then after today's session, the session to wrap up the series next month, we'll be working on another way of approaching this in addition, maybe instead of, but notifications and automation, and then of course vacations, so that you can correct issues in real time, get alerts when things go wrong, how you might be able to use automation to eliminate some of those issues in the first place, and then kind of some next steps where to go from there. And then throughout this session, if you have any questions, feel free to type in the questions pane. I'll try to get to them as they come in, depending how we're doing on time. And then we'll hopefully have a few minutes at the end for questions as well. All right, so quick recap of last session. This is going to be pretty quick breeze through it, but last session we talked through the different hardware asset lifecycle stages, so all the way from ordering to disposing, and kind of this being the place to start with asset management is figuring out what needs to change when you go from one state to another. So we threw it all up on the board and we figured out these are our core statuses, maybe some custom statuses you may or may not be using depending on your environment, and what items can go from one state to another. So we kind of walked all the way from order to disposal, some of those one-off tasks such as loaner deployment, stolen and missing devices, when devices need to be reclaimed and wiped, and so forth. So basically, these are all the valid ways that hardware assets can go from one state to another. And based on this, it wouldn't be acceptable for something to go from received to disposed, for example. So we start here and we figure out what we need to establish a process for. And for each of those, and we went through received and in stock to deploy, that deployment process last time, and figured out, well, what do we need? What needs to happen when an asset is deployed? And then we know first off, it can only get deployed from a received state or an in stock state, and then beyond that, what fields do we need to set when that happens? And we kind of looked at the form, and we picked out probably 10 fields that were candidates to be set when devices are deployed, and there certainly are probably 10 fields you could consider, and then some fields that you certainly don't need to set. So distinguishing maybe between primary user and custodian, that could often be a point of confusion for analysts, where If you're deploying a device, you don't need to set that primary user because that info is going to come in from config-man. So identifying when a device is deployed, we need the status change, we need the location set, we need the custodian set, and we need the date, the assigned date set. So we might come up with, these are the items that we need to have set when a status change happens, and you essentially need that for all of these states. So we only went through one, and part of the challenge to you as an asset manager is, or an SCSM admin, is to figure out what does this look like for your organization, and when items can go from one state to another, what needs to be set. And in this case, suppose these are the 4 fields we want to get set. Not saying that that's what your organization would do, just an example. So what we're going to do today, the actual tail end of today, is we're going to actually make a task that helps facilitate making sure that these 4 fields are set. And we're going to kind of work towards that along the way. So that's it for the recap. So into today, we're going to start by identifying invalid cases and how do we prioritize or figure out what the priority should be for those cases. So again, this is the example we're going through, and let's suppose that we have, we're finding as asset managers or SCSM admins, we're coming across in our day-to-day some hardware assets that are deployed that might or might not have a custodian, might or might not have an assigned date, but what we do know is that we're seeing a lot of hardware assets that are deployed that don't have a location set. And perhaps for one reason or the other, audit or whatnot, we need to make sure that the location is always set when a device is deployed, and it's a pretty big organizational issue if it's not. So first off, how often is it happening? So what has gone wrong? How often is this occurring? And so in this case, the location is missing, and how often, we don't know. We've come across a couple odds and ends. So let's first hop over to a demo and figure out how we might be able to determine that. Today, by the way, it's going to be a pretty demo heavy day. Opted for more of a customization rich training here than PowerPoint. So hope no one was hoping for a nice long PowerPoint presentation. So first off, how often is the issue going wrong? So I have all 13 of my hardware assets open here in my lab, and I can kind of eyeball it pretty quickly here and see that I have a handful that don't have a location set. I can of course compare the status and the location. In this case, I'd be looking for deployed assets that don't have a location, and that's an invalid case. So the how often, we can figure that in a variety of ways. First and foremost, you can just look at the grids in the portal as a nice starting point. So you're able to sort, group, and filter in these grids, and grouping is the ability just to drag that location name up to the top, for example, and then you can see, well, these are all of our assets that don't have a location. These are the ones that do have a location. Bump it up so I can see everything on one page. And then you can also do substatus, subgrouping. So I could also group on status, and our invalid case is all of these that that would fit under one kind of caret here. The location being null and the status being deployed. Don't have any in this case, but hopefully get the picture. So you can group pretty easily there to find those different kind of subsets of items that might be invalid cases. You can also filter. So let's say you have a ton of assets and you just wanted to see the ones that are equal to deployed. I'm going to do in stock here. Apologies, don't have any deployed here in this example. But so now I can see that I just have 5 items that are in stock, and you can come up with whatever criteria you need here to see that subgrouping that you're looking for. And one quick small note with this, to be able to really group and sort and filter effectively through the hardware assets all view, as I'm showing you here, make sure you're using those newer asset views. These were launched several main versions ago. These have been out a couple years now, but they're navigation nodes in the navigation settings. As an SCSM admin, you can see those listed here under new asset admin, new contracts, new hardware, so forth. The older ones are still there, and those are going to continue to be there by default when you do an upgrade. So it's up to you to flip those on when you're ready to move to those new views. From a functionality standpoint, look and feel, they're identical. They look very, very similar. Now, the key point that's different, that separates these older views from the newer views, is the newer views use our platform cache, which is a technical term for just another service that's running with the portal. But basically, the big advantage, it's using that new technology to allow for much better performance here. The paging that's being done, for example, I have a whopping 13 hardware assets in my lab. You're going to have thousands. And if you're familiar with Service Manager and the portal, the cap for items is 500. It's only going to retrieve a max of 500. And these new views will actually do that paging and filtering and sorting server side. So I have, let's say I have 10,000 items here. Well, I'm only showing 50 per page, so it's going to get the first 50 and not have to pull back all those items. And so you'll notice actually a pretty decent performance difference between the older and new views. So if you do have a lot of assets in your environment, I encourage you to check them out. View them side by side and see if you can notice the difference there. And even with grouping and filtering here, if I filtered out everything just to show what's in stock, well, it's going to get as many results as it can that meet that criteria from the server. None of the filtering is client side. Well, I mean, it is, and then it'll fetch new results, as many as it needs to display. So much better performance. Do make sure that you turn on those new views and use them. Probably just turn off the old ones and get rid of the word new in it. But for the sake of differentiating them here, I want to show that to you. This is what they look like out of box. So you can find assets, different groups of invalid cases, whatever criteria you might be looking for. Via sorting, grouping, filtering. There's also a search here as well. So pretty handy way to find things on the fly. Another option you have is to use the Cyrus and View Builder to create different criterias of subsets of items. You can create those in the console and then promote them to the portal. I won't get into that here on today's webinar. There's plenty of resources out on our support portal that walks through doing that. But you could make a view with the Cyrus and View Builder that shows just assets that are deployed and that don't have a location. And that would, without having to sort, group, and filter, you kind of have a saved view that you could go to view that type of data. Use those with caution, though, I will say, just because performance-wise, they're not going to be as optimal as the stuff I was just showing you, those newer views. So if you do have tons of assets you're expecting to be in a view, it'll be comparable to those older asset views in the portal. So if it's a small group of items that are going to show up in that bucket, View Builder is a great solution there. If it's a lot of items, it won't be as fast. So it's different tool for each job. So depending on what you're looking for, depending on volume, there's a number of ways to find items in that. The goal here, how often is this occurring? That's what we're trying to determine here. And that's a big one, because if you run into one issue, it could just be a one-off, not something to address. But if you run into lots of cases, then there's probably something going wrong. So before you even move forward, you got to figure out how important is this. It's kind of the obvious question, but is this something that's actually critical, or is this kind of a nice to have field that's only relevant in some cases? And pick your battles. Start with what matters most, what's happening most frequently. And then we got to kind of think about, why is this occurring? Who is involved? So, one thing that you can use to figure that out is you could go to the history of the hardware asset. So you see a hardware asset, for example, that's been deployed that doesn't have a location. Well, you can figure out who did that by looking at the history. You can figure out if maybe they, when they did that as well. Maybe they set one field and they came back and set another field at another time. And you could maybe look at that and determine, well, you're supposed to set those all. It's supposed to happen at the one, during that one deployment step. So, it might, knowing what's going on, what actually happened to get the asset in the state and by who, is an important question to ask. And with the who in particular, one really important thing to look for is this everybody? Is this a lot of people in a certain support group, or is this just one person? is this maybe a new person that hasn't been trained on the process and they're making the mistakes, and maybe it's just a simple FYI to them about the process and correction. Definitely different dynamic if it's everybody versus an odder end person that might just need a brush up on training. And then the other thing to ask here is has this issue been addressed previously? Of course, if it's something that you never trained on, or folks maybe a new process you established, new expectations you established, and folks aren't in the loop yet, well, there's a big difference between number of times each time you have to address this, there's likely something else underlying that's going on that's causing the issue to happen. And remember that remediation, it's a two-way street. So folks aren't going to follow your process if the process doesn't make sense. They're not going to follow the process if they don't know what the process is. If it's not documented in clear, concise manner and posted somewhere that the folks that you need to follow this are aware of. If you don't set the expectations for what has to happen and when, then it's not going to get followed, and that's kind of the bottom line with it. So, is this process not being followed? Are these mistakes happening because folks don't know what the process is, because they don't understand the process, because they're not trained on it? Or are they deliberately not following it because certain things don't make sense? Those are all questions to kind of have that dialogue with the individual or groups of people that are making these mistakes, and see if you can first and foremost correct that process. Get the feedback from those users. It's you're not going to get it right the first time. It's a kind of continual improvement strategy here. You're going to keep going at it and refining, and things change over time too. So you're going to have to keep evolving these processes as you set them. So this is your starting point, and there really should not be any other starting point. Dig into what went wrong, why it went wrong, who's making the mistake, and figure out why. If it's important, anyway, figure out why. Maybe refine that process, maybe just communicate that a little bit more. But assuming you've done all of that, you've had those conversations, we need to do something else. So maybe some of the feedback that you get, for example, is there's too many. I'm not finding the right set of assets. Because there's too much stuff in the portal. There's too many options. I don't know where to go to particularly maybe get something done. So there's a number of ways we can simplify that. So I'm actually skipping over the first one. We'll circle back. So simplify navigation is the first thing that you can do. So we were actually looking at that just a moment ago here, the navigation settings. So as a portal analyst, as a portal admin, you can click your name at the top, go to navigation settings. And let's say that folks are confused because we accidentally, first off, turned on the old and the new views at once, and they might be confused as to where to go. So we can fix that pretty easily by clicking on those different nodes and just making them not visible, unchecking that box. Turn off the whole contracts node, the older one, hardware, software. Okay, so I've made it a little bit easier there. Now I have less confusion over where to go for that. Maybe some of the folks that are addressing these issues are getting confused because there's a lot of different options here, and some of those options are about contracts, and maybe some of the folks that are dealing with the deployment don't care so much about contracts, and they don't need to see those. So you can hide those subfields as well. So how this kind of matches up is new hardware assets over here matches up with this navigation icon over here, and then you see there's kind of like a header, hardware assets, lease or warranty, so forth. That matches up here with these three here, and then if you expand any of those, that's when we see the actual views themselves. So you see leases or warranties expired, warning, so forth. So I'm actually in this case, let's say that the folks that are seeing this, maybe I just need to remove certain AD groups from here to so that folks don't see those items if they don't need to. I'm just going to toggle them off here. In this case, make it do it a little bit faster. But I can pretty quickly and easily simplify the interface, just the navigation here, and only show individuals what they need to see. And that kind of goes a long way. A lot of the time, it's just there's too much to see that's relevant for a certain person's role. So you can simplify pretty easily what folks see and they don't see. So Up next, so navigation, that can be one quick thing, kind of quick win for you to address. And then the next thing is simplify the portal forms. Looking at this form here, let me do a quick refresh. Okay, so looking at this form here, there's a lot here. There's a lot of fields, some of which we might have reviewed already and determined we definitely want to use. There might be fields in here we definitely don't want to use. But either way, there's a lot here. So one thing we can do right off the bat is simplify this. We can maybe get rid of some fields we don't want to see. Maybe there are some fields that are on, for example, the finance tab that don't make so much sense to your users being on the finance tab. Custodian might be one of those. Maybe assign date might be one of those. Those are two fields that we dictated were important back here. Those are two of our 4 fields that we want to take care of. So maybe we want to move stuff around, hide certain fields, make this form our own, and definitely encourage you to do so. This is just the out-of-box form. It's not going to work for everyone. You're going to need to customize this to your needs. And fortunately, we make that pretty easy in the portal. So let me actually walk through how to do that real quick. So as a starting point, every change that you make, doesn't matter what it is, any customization you make is going to live in this custom space folder. Without exception, there are no changes to the Cyerson portal directory that should be made outside of this custom space folder. Now, to make a custom form, hardware asset or otherwise, this applies to all the asset management items, all the work items in the portal. You go to this scripts folder, forms folder, templates folder, not to make any edits, but to copy a file from there. So every form that you can customize is in this directory, and it's given a name that should match the name in the URL. So hardware asset there, hardware asset here. So what we're going to actually do is copy this form, and we're going to paste that into the root of our custom space folder. So recapping one more time, you go from Cyerson portal, scripts, forms, templates, hardwareasset.js file is what you want, and you're going to paste that in your custom space folder. Now that alone doesn't do anything. You've copied the same file that was being loaded and you've put it in custom space. Now, how the portal thinks as far as loading forms is it's first going to look at the custom space folder, and it's going to say, I'm trying to load a hardware asset page. Do I have a custom hardware asset form? And if it finds this file, it's going to use this file. If it doesn't find this file, it's going to go to that location we just pulled from. It's going to go to that scripts, forms, templates folder, and it's going to use that folder. So don't edit that file, copy it, and go into custom space, because then you can revert really easily if need be, and anything outside of custom space is overwritten on upgrade anyway. So you get this hardware asset JS file open in custom space, and this is the form right here. So any changes you make to this will be live in real time. So before you make any changes, make a backup of the file first. It's incredibly easy to miss a comma or a bracket or a quote, and your form won't load at all. So unless you enjoy spending the whole day searching for commas in in JS files, I don't imagine you do. Make a quick backup, and then everything that's rendered on that form is going to be here in this file. So we can kind of see we have asset name, hardware asset ID, primary user, catalog item, and that matches up with different rows and columns here: asset name, ID, user, catalog item. So let's suppose that maybe we're not using catalog item, and we don't even need to see that. Well, I can get rid of it just by deleting that line. And you gotta open this in administrative mode, save it, and a quick refresh of that page. What we should see is that catalog item field going away. Okay, and sure enough, it's gone. So I deleted one line in that file. that corresponded to that field in the form, and it's gone. And now primary user spans the whole row. Looks a little funky. We can change that too. I'm not going to get into every detail here for the sake of time. Form customization for asset management is no different than work item form customization in the portal, and the Cyrus support portal has plenty of knowledge articles on how to do all of this. So just quick example here if this is brand new to anyone. So we got rid of that field. Maybe I don't need to see a few other fields. I can get rid of what I maybe don't want to see. And maybe I want to move this custodian field right next to primary user. Maybe it's easier for our users to see both of those fields side by side, so they kind of remember that there's a distinction between them. Well, each tab is going to be broken up in here by tab, and I can just kind of where it says tab in the file, so I can go to that particular tab, finance in this case, can find that custodian field, and I can simply cut it, save it, well, cut it, paste it, making sure to not miss commas, right? Remember each set here is comma separated, and this is a JSON kind of format. So it's going to be curly brackets and name value pairs. So data type, what is the data type? It's a string. Data type, what is the data type? It's a user picker. Display name, asset name. Property name, name. So this, it's going to all be in this format. Brackets, name value pairs, quotes, all separated by commas. It's going to keep that same format. We have a question from Michael. Where can we find that template? That's in the Cyrus portal scripts forms templates directory. Was where I copied that from. All of the forms that you can edit are in that location. You copy that file to custom space. And sure enough, I copied custodian over, and now primary user and custodian, they're side by side right here on the main page. And also custodian is gone from this page. I could have also copied that. I cut it in this case. I'll do that. I'll do that for assign date. Let's move assign date over next. And in this case, I don't know where it is, so I'm just gonna search for it. There it is. So I mean, these properties are named in a pretty straightforward fashion. I'm gonna copy, not cut this time. So you should be able to find most of those in there. Just remember to add commas where needed. Refresh this. Every single one of these curly brackets should be comma separated. The last one doesn't need a comma. The last one in the set doesn't need a comma. But your rows are basically set up by these different column field lists, and then the different columns in each row are automatic based on the number of fields in the row. And that's all editable as well. If you wanted a field to span more columns than it does by default, you can set that all up. Again, support portal for all that. But you can see there, my assign date field is now on this main form, and easy enough, right? To copy and move those fields over, and you'll see that it's also here. No issue whatsoever with having a field set in two places. In fact, if I set it here, you see it's set over there as well. So it's good. The format will get updated when it saves. I didn't save it this case because I want to show you the next part here. So form customization, getting rid of fields you don't need, moving fields around, those are pretty straightforward things to do. I mean, we made a couple changes there in a course of just a few minutes. If you have folks not setting the custodian because they didn't know to click the finance tab, well, pretty easy issue to fix there. Move it to a more sensible location for those folks, and or copy it. Remember, you don't have to it doesn't have to be one tab or the other, it can be multiple spots. So let's say we keep going at this form, we get rid of stuff we don't need, we move stuff to where we think it makes the most sense. One other thing that you can do is you can disable fields. Let's say we don't want, maybe people are setting the primary user instead of the custodian. They're mixing up what these fields are. Well, maybe we don't want anyone to set the primary user because that data comes in from configman. Truthfully, we don't. We want that just to be whatever configman thinks it is. So we can also add into here, there's a disabled box that you can use, and it's just disabled true or false. So there's actually disabled false there by default. You can just flip that to a true, and I can also copy paste that to any other field if I don't want that field to be manually edited. Then just flipping that disabled to true or adding in the comma disabled colon true makes that field not editable. So just quick one word change, false to true, and you're not going to have folks setting primary user anymore. Whether they set custodian is to be to be determined. You can also make fields required and so forth. Maybe you require, I don't know, let's say a description for, you know, every hardware asset has to have a description of some sort. Well, then you can just flip, again, that false to a true, and pretty quickly there's a required box in there, and then sure enough, it won't let me save now if that field is empty. So move fields around, get rid of fields, make them required, make them read-only, do whatever you need to do to make this form your own, and that's really the first step. So hide what you don't need, simplify those portal forms. There's a lot there. There's not a single organization that is going to take the product out of box and it's going to be catered to them perfectly. There is always, it's part of the reason why the product is so customizable. Every organization has different needs, and it's going to need to tweak those default forms, the default navigation nodes, so forth, to be their own. So encourage you to do that. Those are kind of your initial remediation steps, and no expertise, no coding expertise or anything like that required to get those things done. So let's say that you do that. That's your kind of second step here. You've addressed the process. You've simplified as much as you can, and folks are still screwing up certain, you know, they're forgetting to set custodian and location. So that's what we're going to look at here towards for the tail end here of the changes. So some advanced next steps that you can do, and those come in the form of what's called a custom task in the portal. So I'm actually get back to the demo now full time. So what we over on the right hand side, whether you're in any of these asset management items or whether you're in a work item in the portal, there's going to be these tasks along the right hand side, and all tasks are they do something. They change a field. They you know, there's a task to print the work item or the config hardware asset. There's a task to assign a vendor. So there's all these associate tasks first and foremost, and all these are doing is letting you. It's kind of like a link maybe to set a certain field. So if I wanted to associate a cost center, I could click that button, but it's the equivalent. That would be the equivalent in this case of clicking Finance tab, clicking the magnifying glass. It's the exact same thing. It's kind of like a shortcut to get to something on the form. And maybe we determine that we only want folks going through these tasks, so we want to make fields disabled over on the form side, or maybe vice versa. Maybe we only want folks editing fields in the form and not going to the tasks. Maybe we just want to simplify. Maybe there's too many associate tasks here, and that's kind of overwhelming some folks. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of those associate tasks, all of them, all at once. So I have open a customization I put together. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to post this up in the community here after our session today. So this, if you want to try this out for yourself, there's a few items here. Now, again, it all goes into custom space. So that is not changing no matter what we're doing. And this custom JS file is the first file. This is the file, you know, this file kind of drives everything. It loads on every page of the portal, and it applies whatever logic it's supposed to apply in the script to whatever page it's on. So I know that kind of sounds vague, but if I put code in there that says print out a message that says hello, that's going to run on every page of the portal. So this is what's in my custom JS file, and I will have that provided to you as well. But in this case, you know, I've seen some organizations just write code straight up in here, and this custom JS file becomes tens of thousands of lines long. And although functionally that's not going to change too much, that becomes kind of a hassle to maintain and something I recommend kind of against. What we've provided here and what I encourage you all to use in your environment is a script loader. So this will actually allow you to store your entire solution in a separate file as I have here, and we're going to go through this here in a few, and bring that whole solution in via a single line. So in this case, I'm reading in that entire JavaScript file and loading it. And the script loader here only loads that content in if a certain segment is found in the URL. So in this case, it's looking for hardware asset, which it's going to see right here. And because that exists, it says, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to fetch this 119 line customization to do whatever this customization does. So you might have customizations for hardware, software, all your different work items, and you don't necessarily want all of those loading on every page because that's a lot of code potentially. So what this will allow you to do is only load what you need depending on the page that you're on, and allow you to turn it on and off with a simple comment, uncomment, or just delete the line. So it simplifies things quite a bit to load your code in this way. And so that entirety of that custom.js file is included here in this copy to custom.js. Now the solution I'm going to show you here is broken into two files, this deploy HW.js as well as an HTML file, and we'll get into the guts of those a little bit here. Today, don't have time to go into all the nuances of the code, but certainly the first couple bits here I'm going to get into. So if you've done any sort of portal task customization in the past, this probably looks familiar to you. There's this convention app custom form tasks add, and then you specify what type of item it should add to. And hardware asset is one of those, is the type in this case, and it can apply to any work item, any asset management item you can make a custom task for. So we're going to circle back to this one in just a second, but in this case I have app custom form task add, hardware asset is the form this is applying to, and I have a null here, which this basically says this code is going to run when we're on the hardware asset page, is essentially what that boils down to. And we're using some logic here to hide what we don't want, and there's examples of this exactly in the portal, support portal. So it's using something called jQuery to find an element. And in this case, it's finding all elements in the task menu that have the word associate in their name, and then it's applying a hide to those elements that are found. And so in this case, if I go ahead, I uncommented that line here, and if I refresh this page, it's not going to do anything because the portal's going to cache. So what I encourage you to do, you can clear your history. If you clear your history, it'll update immediately. Chances are your browser's going to cache a bit. Clear your history, and that'll become live. Handy little trick that I use: if you hit F12 in your browser, in Chrome anyway, it allows you to right-click this refresh button and do what's called an empty cache hard reload, and that'll make sure that you're grabbing a live copy of the file, not any sort of a cached version of that file. Handy shortcut. I find myself constantly refreshing and so forth, but clearing history does the same thing. So there we go. Notice that this is a lot cleaner now. We go from having a boatload of tasks that are kind of repeat capable. You can do all those same things on the form directly, so maybe we don't need them. So we've simplified the choices here just by hiding all of those. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I also don't want, so the task we're going to make here today, I think I neglected to mention this. The task we're going to make here today is going to, instead of saying, hey, when you deploy an asset, make sure to set the status, the location, the custodian, and the assign date. And instead of relying on our users, our analysts, to remember that, we're going to have a simple task added to the page that says deploy asset. And it'll set this deployed status for us. It'll set the assign date to today, and we'll give them the opportunity to, in one single screen, one single prompt, to say what's the location, what's the custodian. So I have this task all done here. I'm just gonna get rid of the if statement that's hiding it. So I'll show you what this looks like here. And then with as much time as we have, we'll get through some of the nitty-gritty with it. But all right, so page reloading. Okay, so I've unhidden that task. So my code here is adding this deploy asset task, and let's take a look at what that's doing. So I have some logic in this task to only show deploy asset as an option when the hardware asset status is in stock or received. Because remember that when we looked at this diagram, those are the only two states in which an asset should go to deploy. So if it's in retired, we shouldn't be able to deploy it, and so forth. So that can help mitigate some mistakes there, reduce some mistakes there. So if I click this task, say I'm deploying an asset, up comes a box that says deploy hardware, enter the custodian name. I'm gonna enter user and user one, location, so it's gonna be based out of Baltimore. I type whatever subset of that location convention I have, and we're gonna go ahead and assign it to Baltimore 202. We're gonna hit OK, and then a prompt comes up that says saving changes. It's gonna make those changes, it's gonna refresh the page. Okay, and by clicking that one task, we have the custodian set, we have the assign date set to today, the status is deployed, the location is set to Baltimore 202, and the task is gone. This is deployed, so I can't deploy it again. That wouldn't make sense according to our processes. So the right task is showing up for whatever scenarios it's relevant. And now, some other things you might notice with that is, if I'm allowing you to change the task over, change those 4 fields via the task. There's some assumptions. The assumption is that you're doing that on the correct day, right? Because it's going to set the assigned date. So you have the ability, if you wanted to, using the same methods we just looked at, to disable fields you don't want as well. If I only want folks to be able to deploy, to set the custodian by nature of deploying it through that task, if I only want the date assigned through that task, if I only want the status changed through that task, I can, through adding a couple different lines to that hardware asset JS file, I can restrict those fields. And by doing so, kind of force the analyst to say, if you're going to deploy a task, the only way you can do that is by clicking a task, and you're going to be prompted for whatever relevant information there is in that state, and have no ability to change this and make mistakes. So if I wanted to set the custodian assign date, I'd have to click the task. Same for the status, same for the location. I think I missed that one. Yeah, I didn't add the disabled true to that, but you get the point. So you can kind of guide folks through these different tasks. So imagine that you have a task for every different state change. All of a sudden, it's really difficult to make a mistake, if not impossible. So might be worth creating different tasks that you need for those different scenarios. Now, one other thing to note, there's little other ways folks can get creative and make changes. So there's a change status task out of box that they could potentially use, and perhaps we don't want them to do that. So I actually have, that's my last uncommented line over here. So I'm going to save that, refresh, and sure enough, that is what finishes locking down the form. So a few changes to make there, form edits potentially, and some task customizations, even just hiding tasks, adding new tasks to be able to guide analysts more towards what you expect rather than having them refer to the process and following that, both of which are acceptable, but they obviously take varying amounts of time. And Tadis asked a question, can you provide the script? And yes, I will be posting this to community after the webinar today, if you want to take this for a test drive yourself. Now, looking at that script, just very briefly here, we have a couple components here. So if you did want to kind of tweak this and maybe have a crack at some simple task creation yourself, a few things are going on here. I'm just going to talk to the kind of guts of this real quick. So you have, everything's going to go in this app custom form tasks add convention. That's the supported way of adding content into custom.js to adding functionality to a certain form page. And if you have, so the second parameter here, so you see that these are actually the same, the first part of them is the same, everything from here back. If you have a value for this second parameter, it's going to add the task name down here. And if you have null, then that's just saying execute this code when the page loads. So this logic is not tied to you clicking a button, it's tied to the page loading. That's the only difference there. So this first part up here, this is adding this new deploy asset task to our task panel, and everything inside of this, so this whole line, is executing only when you click on that task. And so what's happening here is this deploy asset open window function is running when I click on the task. And that's the entirety of what happens when you click that task button. And we're not going to get into the logic here, but what too much, but what this does is it reads in this HTML file, which is in the same directory, and it puts the custodian on the page, it puts the location on the page. So depending on what fields you're using, you can follow something very similar to get the right fields you need in here. It is there's some web development involved in there, but most of it can be tweaked and kind of copy pasted and tweaked. But that's probably not the first thing you'll take a crack at. And then the actual last, so that open window function there's an OK button in that window, and when that OK button is hit, that's when changes need to be made to our form, and that's all that this second function is doing, is making the actual changes. And pretty much any task that you see out in the community or otherwise, it's going to have flavors of the same thing. It might have flavors of opening up a window and displaying some prompts. It might have flavors of saving some changes of some sort. So you're going to see some similar logic there. Believe me, I didn't write that from scratch. Copy, paste, and change what you need is a good way to get started. And of course, try to understand what's going on. The more you do, makes it easier to develop more complex features there. But more likely where we're going to start is with simple stuff like I have in here. So we wanted to add logic in to not show that deploy asset task when we only wanted to show it when it was received, when the asset was received or in stock. And that's what we're doing here. We have an if statement that says if the status equals this, or if the status equals this, then we're going to find that deploy asset task in the task pane, which we added right up here, and we're going to hide it. So it's kind of the same concept. It's this whole snippet here is kind of the same. It's jQuery that's based on these selectors, finding an element and then doing something with that element, which in this case we're hiding it. So that this is what hides that task when it's not relevant. It's still being added, but then it's being hidden. So if it's in an ordered state or a disposed state, the task is added, but then it's hidden. So it's like it's not added at all. And then changing and hiding those out of box statuses is just a simple same concept. Find it, find the element, hide it. So that's pretty much it for this custom task. Of course, there's a lot of complexity there, and if anyone has specific questions on it, I'm happy to get into that a bit more. But feel free to take this for a spin yourself, and if you wanted to tweak that and perhaps add some fields or move some fields or so forth, you have most of the tools there that you need to accomplish that. And of course, if you need any help with it, if you don't want to go down the programming route in any way, then we at Cyerson Services are more than capable and able to help you out with that. We could set up an engagement and put together whatever tasks your team might need. So Ben had a question, is there a way to have a task bulk edit assets, for example, edit all of the assets related to a particular PO? So certainly, yeah, I mean, there's really no limit to what you can do. So if you were looking at a PO, for example, PO form, and you wanted to be able to make a task that searches for a bunch of hardware assets and associates them all at once, there's certainly tasks you could create for that. Pretty much anything is possible. It's just a matter of how complex it is, and some some things are harder than others. It's something that kind of has to be assessed, whatever your requirements are, and determine how, an estimate for how long something like that might take. But pretty much anything is possible. Just again, just depends what it is. But certainly you could have a task that edits multiple items at once. Okay, back to this. So that's actually all we have for today. So let me pause here for just a moment and say, do we have any questions? Any other questions from the audience? And while you all are thinking and typing your questions, I just want to end on this note here. Few points on this last slide. If you'd like if you're not a customer, you don't already own Cyerson Asset Management, and you'd like a 30-day trial, and feel free to contact team at cyerson.com, and we can get you set up with that if you want to take this for a test drive. We do have the last webinar session coming up in November. Same registration page. If you're interested in attending that last session, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be looking at automation notifications for that last session. How you might do some of this stuff behind the scenes without needing to, maybe some automatic alerting, maybe how to make certain changes automatic without having to rely on analysts to even click a task. If you need any help with implementation just of the Basecamp product, or if you do have any training you need, we do have training webinars ongoing, so check out our website to see when those are coming up. I believe the next one is end of November for CAM. And if you'd like any custom training or any assistance from the Cyerson service team, we are happy to help, and we can get you in touch. Just contact team at cyerson.com, and we'll get you connected with the right folks to scope something out. And I've mentioned a few times as well, the Cyerson community. That's where I'm going to post the code from today. That's a great place, a great resource to go to check out, existing customizations that other folks at Cyerson have done and posted, that other customers have done and posted. If you just have a general customization question, want some feedback on something you've done, any questions or assistance, just in general, lots of awesome people out there in the community. Customers and Cyerson alike are on that forum and helping out. So definitely encourage you to go there and check that out if you're looking to get into any sort of customization on your own. Some great resources there. A couple questions, another question come in here. So can we find an example of load script and the other hardware asset task customization you showed? So the load scripts, so I will say real quick, load script is a recommended way of loading customizations into your environment. So not everyone who writes a customization is going to follow best practices. So if you see any code in the community or otherwise that's just put right into custom.js, the recommendation is that you break that into its own file and you load it with the load script. It just makes it a lot easier to manage, especially as you have more and more customizations added, new custom tasks and so forth, because turning it off is quite easy. It's a simple uncomment line. You might also see some a slightly different variation out there called get script. Same end result, but the load script here does a couple things a little bit better. Error handling is a little bit better. It'll tell you where the error is in this file as opposed to saying an error on line 35. And this method as well helps reduce what's loaded in on any page load. So let's say that you have a custom JS file that has, I don't know, rinse and repeat, right? However many customizations, and therefore every different page in the portal, you have some for service requests, some for hardware, some for contracts, so forth. And let's say that in total it's 100,000 lines of code. Well, custom.js, if it was right in custom.js, that would load on every page, and only a snippet of that would even be needed. But the script loader does better by, at worst, in this case, let's say that there's 100,000 lines of code linked to in these other files. At worst, it's going to, at minimum, it's going to load 53 lines of code, and then it's only going to go out and get the files if you're on a page that needs that file. So it helps reduce, every little bit counts when it comes to performance. So it helps to be able to only load what you need on certain pages. So you don't need to use the script loader. You could just put stuff right in custom.js, but strongly recommend using it because it makes it easier to manage and has some performance benefits. And this is, I have that all included in these. These are the 3 files essentially that I've included in the zip, and I'll be posting in the community. Copy of the script loader is right in there. Yep, no problem. So we have a couple more minutes here, 3 minutes to spare. Are there any other questions from anyone? Anyone else? All right, well, I'll stick around for another minute here in case anything else comes up. But thank you all for attending today. Hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll wrap this up next month. Make sure to get registered if you aren't already, and we'll check out some automation and notifications. Thank you all.